So I wanted to move on to the 4 phases of your cycle. And so as I said, we've got, these 4, and in my training I learned how to correlate them to the different seasons, because there are very specific characteristics that that correspond to the seasons the external seasons. So we've got the winter, spring, summer, and fall. And so that first phase, as I said, is this bleeding phase. So the first day of your menstrual cycle, of any cycle, is the first day of bleeding. So that would be day number 1, and that's where you would count from. And I used to be that girl who would go to the doctor, and the doctor would ask me when my last period was, and I never had a clue. I used to just make a day up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had no idea. And now I'm the menstrual nerd.
I have notes in my calendar, Nicole. I'll see if I can find it while you're talking to show everyone, where it's literally like Post-it notes where it's like luteal phase starts today. But it has all the notes of what we're going to learn. But go on.
You'll definitely get a good education today, Janine.
Awesome.
For sure. So as I was saying, these physical characteristics, so your progesterone will plunge and it'll cause your uterine lining to shed. Regular period should be anywhere from 2 to 7 days, but you really want it, like a healthy period, it should be around 4 to 5 days. That's what you're really aiming for. And when you get your period, it should be fresh, it should be bright red. If it's brown and clumpy, that could be a sign of a hormonal imbalance or some kind of congestion, which we can talk about afterwards if anyone has any questions around that. And all of the hormones that are in your body, so we've got the estrogen and the progesterone and the testosterone and, of course, the FSH and the LH that come from your brain, those are all really low. So this is the point in your cycle where you're at your lowest hormonal point, and you will feel it's a very neutral feeling. In addition to that, your cervix actually does a lot of different things too. So at this point in your cycle, it's firm and low. It's slightly open to allow menstrual blood to pass through, and it'll change as we approach ovulation, which I'll talk about. On an emotional level, so this is a time of great vulnerability for a lot of women, and it really is a time to tap in and check in with yourself on a constant basis and see how you're feeling. There are a lot of women who feel really tired and fatigued and have felt that way leading up to their period. And there's also usually a sense of relief. I know a lot of women say to me things like, oh, I just, PMS is like a mini depression. I want to jump out of a building. I mean, like, I get all kinds of things. I want to scream at everyone around me. And so when that period finally comes, it's this, it's a release, and women feel a great deal of relief and just, they're feeling good. The other idea around when you get your period too, and this is, based on what women have done for thousands of years, is to just take a break from whatever daily activities you are doing. And some women have jobs, others run businesses, others have children and husbands and all kinds of things, or partners. And if there's any way at all to, mark that in your calendar and say, okay, this is my day, and I'm going to, even if I take an hour to just take a walk or be alone in some kind of way, that it really helps you in honoring this part of your cycle, which is, again, winter is a time of rest and hibernation and reflection on the year that has passed. And this is the same kind of thing. You feel reflective and a little introspective and wanting or desiring to just look back on the past month and see, what your accomplishments, and maybe you write in your journal and you say, okay, well, what did I accomplish this month? What's happened? What would I have done differently? Or what would I like to improve on, or something like that. I think that this is a really great time because, as I said, all your hormones are really low and you're not being influenced by anything. You're just in that state of naturally being.
Love it.
Yeah, I think it's so great.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, a time of relaxation and honoring our body's cyclical flow.
I'll take it.
Yeah. So that's our bleeding phase. And then we move on to the follicular phase, which is also corresponds to the spring time. And so the idea here is that this follicular phase is it's a time of proliferation almost. And so we're starting to have a little bit of hormonal action. So our period has ended and that follicular phase has begun. And it should really be around 7 to 10 days in order for you to for it to be considered like a healthy, fertile menstrual cycle. And that follicle stimulating hormone, as I discussed, will start to stimulate your ovaries, and one of those follicles will become dominant, and that's how the egg is released. And what you'll notice, and if you're looking at your cervical fluid, is that vaginal dryness will be pretty present for that first couple of days after you have your period, but then it's going to start to take on like a wetter consistency as you get closer to ovulation. And what that means is you can actually look at it, and that's how a lot of women track their cycles as well and track their ovulation. They determine it based on their cervical fluid because it changes so much throughout your cycle, and completely affected by hormones. So estrogen and testosterone start to change the consistency to that wetter consistency. It's like wetter, creamier, that kind of thing. Mm. And question. Were you going to say something?
I was just going to ask you, because I think something that comes up for me when I'm tracking, is this based off, so if our period lasts for 5 days, does our follicular phase start the day that we're not bleeding, or do we still, or because some women have like even shorter periods, like what if you have a 3-day period? Should you still consider that you're going into your follicular phase that day when you stop your period? Because I think sometimes we try to get mathematical with this and go, oh, I'm in follicular phase, it's 7 days, period 4, follicular 7, and then what's next? But are we supposed to be listening to our bodies, or are we also trying to follow this kind of like mathematic equation?
I think that, yeah, you're right, and that's a really good question. And so the follicular phase is, you can actually start it from day 1 of your cycle. So instead of thinking of the period phase as being a separate one, I'm using it as that so that we have, a clearer picture of what it looks like. But the follicular phase really is from day 1 of your cycle onwards. And so I probably should change that. It shouldn't really be 7 to 10 days. It would technically be 7 to 10 days depending on how long your period is, if you included your period. But if you start it from day 1 of your cycle, your follicular phase lasts up until the day before ovulation. So that's usually 10 to 14 days.
Okay.
Great. Yeah.
So that's kind of combining the period and you're basically kind of subtracting the period from this equation in that sense. But altogether it would be, if your period's 4 days and your follicular phase is about 10, you're considering that it's about 14 days in each phase before your ovulation comes.
Exactly. Yes. In a lot of cycles, yes. So for some women, and just so everyone knows, you don't necessarily ovulate on day 14. Not everyone has a 28-day cycle. Mm-hmm. So usually you would you would ovulate anywhere between days 11 and days 17. That's really a typical cycle for some people. And so some women ovulate on day 11, and then they have, they get their period on day 25. And so if your cycle is anywhere from 25 to 35 days long, that your entire menstrual cycle, that's okay. So that it's a big range, but that's what's considered average for women.
And you would know your cycle, that's like basics, what the gyno asks us to do, like trying to figure out if each month there's a common number between the time that you end your period and start it again.
Exactly. Absolutely. And there are tons of period tracking apps, and we can definitely talk about that afterwards as well. There are a lot of different ones that women can use to collect all this data. It's awesome to be able to collect all this data on yourself, because when you do want to maybe try having a baby, or there's like a health concern that comes up, anything like that can basically help you determine what's going on, because you've collected data for years, literally.
It's crazy we don't learn this, or that our gynecologist, at least mine, never did growing up, that you're not, I never understood the importance or even the fun of understanding your period cycle. I just thought, like you said, it was that question that I never really knew how to answer, and I would try to think about before I had a gynecologist appointment, but didn't realize all the information and all of the resources we could pull for our life just from simply being in tune and aware of.
Girl, don't even get me started.
I know.
I know. It's the most ridiculous thing. Every single woman echoes that same sentiment. And I was the same too. I mean, I was put on the pill as a teenager, and I had no idea what to do because my periods weren't coming normally. I mean, they were coming every 3 to 4 months. And that was the solution that was presented to me. And I wanted to be with all the cool kids who were on the pill. Right. So it's just part of the process. And oh my gosh, if I'd known then what I know now. I know it's like hindsight is 2020, but it really is interesting because every woman in their 20s and 30s says this exact same thing. They had no idea that all of this is going on, all this flux is happening, and there's so much that we can do to to live more in alignment with it, and yet nobody's talking about it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is too, so everyone knows, is that when you're on the pill, none of this is happening. So we're in that state of neutrality all the time. There's no hormonal cycle at all.
Wow.
I know, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but in the follicular phase, this is kind of one of my favorite phases because we're again building up to ovulation. And as I said, you tend to feel that neutral feeling from the time you've had your period because there really isn't a lot of hormones. There's not a lot of hormonal activity. And at, that period time, as I was saying, is, it's just that time of rest and clearing your calendar. If you can do that and not be, going out and partying and things like that, but really just honing in on what your body is asking you to do. And then in this season, what you're doing is you're now starting to build up estrogen and testosterone, and they actually will boost your brain skills, how you're feeling, your energy levels, all of these different things. And so this is a really great time to go out and go to networking events or speak to clients or potential clients, do meetings. If you have a job, go to your job and you schedule meetings with people or presentations or anything like that that's going to require great verbal skills and confidence and just self-assuredness. So the rise of the estrogen and testosterone really start to bring that on, especially as you get further into your follicular phase and closer to ovulation. It's a great time.
Love it.
Yes, so that is the follicular phase, and then we move on to that ovulatory phase, which is a really short time. So it's really, it sort of straddles the follicular phase and then the luteal phase, which comes after this. But this time, of course, there's a lot of hormonal activity happening. As I said before, there's an LH, luteinizing hormone. There's a surge there, and then there's a surge of estrogen. And, of course, there's testosterone, too. Testosterone peaks at this time. And all of these hormones, play a role in your body ovulating, of course. But also testosterone makes you, increases your sex drive. And so it's usually highest around this time of the month, which makes sense because evolutionarily our bodies just want us to get pregnant. That's their goal in life. Not ours, not many of ours, obviously, but that is what our body is trying to do. And what's interesting around this time is, your cervix becomes really soft and it actually moves up higher and it opens up and it becomes really wet. So at this point, your cervical fluid could be watery. It could be almost like egg white, kind of long and stretchy. It's very clear looking. And the sensation is a feeling of wet coldness. So that's typically what women feel around this time. And that day of ovulation itself is the last day that you will feel that. So if you're tracking your cervical fluid, the last day of that very wet, fertile quality cervical fluid is probably the day you've ovulated because it actually dries up pretty fast after that. And like I said, that dominant follicle will burst open, and you will also, interestingly enough, the cervix will move up because it actually wants your body, or it wants the egg to get the best sperm, so it makes them swim further. And if you were to look at that cervical fluid under a microscope, you would see channels. So we're always accommodating for the guys, right? So we have these channels that the sperm can swim up. And so that's what they do. And then also our cervix has these little cervical crypts where the cervical fluid comes from. And what happens is they're basically little stop rest areas for the sperm to actually stop and have a little feed. And so it's hilarious. So yes, but all of these things are happening literally, if you're attempting to get pregnant or whatever, all of that is going on around this time of ovulation, if you're making an effort to get pregnant. So it's really fascinating to me, but That's what's going on a physical level. And then emotionally, things are just as good. So estrogen actually really improves your skin. It makes your skin really glow and look really good. You also release pheromones around this time. And I don't know, I want everyone to pay attention the next time that they're ovulating or they think they're ovulating, just walking down the street and check out guys. I mean, obviously, you know, if you're married or whatever, don't
You can still check out guys.
inappropriately check out guys, but yeah, check them out and see what they're doing. Like, see if they stare at you. And so this is an experiment I do all the time when I ovulate. I find it so fascinating. They don't even know what they're doing, but again, like, this is how humans are built. We literally sense those pheromones, and the men are like, they just stare at you and they can't stop, and they walk past you and they're still staring, and it's hilarious.
That is so funny.
I know. They don't even know why they do it, but that's why they're doing it, because you're like a fertile woman at that point. It's awesome.
It's so good.
It's like a really great, it's a great, you know, self-esteem booster. And so, and at this point too.
That's why I'm always sad that the ovulatory phase is the shortest phase. It's like such a tease.
I know, isn't it? It's so sad. But it really actually, you know, it starts to really build up for many women from like day 10 of their cycle and then through days, you know, 15, 16 after they ovulate. So it's, you know, it's not too short. So that's good. That's comforting.
It's good.
The other thing too I wanted to say as well, like I was saying before, is that, you know, testosterone really gets you, it makes you more like a guy. I mean, in the sense that you are, you know, you're much more confident around this time and you're really owning it. And it's such a good time to, as I was saying before, put yourself in front of people and public speaking, all of these things. It's just a wonderful time to schedule those kinds of events. And you'll also find too, your energy levels are so high around this time as well. And it's such a good time to do like, you know, hardcore exercise, whether it's spinning or, you know, CrossFit or whatever people like to do, or, you know, just going on a long distance ride or whatever you want to do. I find that this is a great time. This, you know, this week is a great time for extra exertion when you're doing exercise. And also a heightened sense of vision and smell and taste. Interestingly enough, that's been found in studies that women have all of this going on during the time of ovulation, and also the verbal skills, as I mentioned before. All of these kinds of things, estrogen and testosterone come together and create magic for us around this time of our cycle. So it's very good to just be out there and putting our best selves forward.
This is the best time, ladies, I think, for prospecting week. I've also hear, like, when you're in sales, it's really hard to say no to women who are ovulating. And such a great time if you're doing, like, a photo shoot for your website. You're just naturally going to be more photogenic and beautiful around this time. So it's really great to think about when you're doing speaking engagements or doing pictures, or when you're really doing a lot of prospecting. It's kind of a great time to fit those calls and those in-person meetings in around this time.
I love that. I think it's so great. There's so much we can do. This is what I mean about hormonal superpowers, literally. I mean, we have these amazing times in our cycle when we can just, you know, we can be out there in the world, and then there are other times where we don't necessarily need to be. We can have different strengths.
You don't want to schedule your sales calls during your first couple days of your period. You're going to be miserable showing up for those.
Yes, exactly. I know. I made the mistake of having like 5 client calls on this, maybe the second day of my period a couple of months ago, and I thought I was going to die. Mm-hmm. Those are already challenging enough, and so it is one of those things where it's good to just start to incorporate the different phases.
And we wonder why we, you know, like, this is such great information to know now, because sometimes we have those days and we don't know why, where we have 5 clients and we're like, oh, I feel pumped. It was such an amazing day. I love my clients. I love giving my time. And then there are other days where we're like, fuck the world. I don't want to see my friends. I want to cancel all my meetings. And then we think that there's maybe something wrong with us. And then I think what's beautiful about this information and tracking it is then you get on your own side, where you're not judging yourself or upset for your reaction, but you can go, oh, that makes sense. I'm ovulating today. That's why I'm in love with everyone, and I want to be outside and meeting people and friends and talking to all my clients.
Totally makes sense, right? I know. So tapping in to that internal wisdom it can be so powerful. I love it. I think it's great. I like what you just said. I agree. I think that we all feel that at some point or another. Okay, so now we have, last but not least, the luteal phase. And so this, of course, is what it corresponds with that fall season or the autumn season. And it's really a time of, after the crazy busy summertime of ovulation with all that bustling and activity, we then start to move into this slower time where we're starting to wind down. And what happens physically is estrogen will drop pretty sharply right after ovulation because it's no longer needed anymore, and the pituitary hormones, the LH and the FSH, will also drop, so they will no longer be present in any high amount at all, and testosterone starts to gradually decline as well. And so one thing to be cognizant of with this luteal phase in terms of our menstrual health is that this phase really should be about 10 to 14 days, but closer to 14 days is really best for a fertile cycle. And what that means is if it's shorter than 10 days, that little egg, if it were to be fertilized, if someone were trying to get pregnant, it needs about 10 to 14 days to make its way from the fallopian tube where it's been fertilized into the uterus, where it will burrow in and make itself nice and at home. And if it doesn't, have that much time, and your cycle, your period comes, say it comes on day 9, it's basically being washed away, and your little fertilized egg doesn't have anywhere to live. So that's what they call a chemical pregnancy, where you have actually had a fertilized egg, but you've gotten your period too soon, and so it's been lost. Yeah, so that's something to think about too, and of course we can talk more about how to lengthen that luteal phase, which is a big issue for a lot of women, and it's usually linked to lower progesterone levels, which again can be caused by a lot of stress, because when we produce a lot of cortisol, cortisol can dampen the production of progesterone, because as I was saying, your ovaries are the first thing to start to shut down if we're in a state of chronic stress for long periods of time, and that's because cortisol takes precedence over progesterone. So that's really something to think about. And even if you're not trying to get pregnant, we want to make sure our luteal phase is about 10 to 14 days, just for the health of our overall health. And then going into testosterone and estrogen, as I said, those decline as this phase progresses, and they're taken over by progesterone. And of course, that's the heat-inducing hormone, which will raise our basal temperature, and that's how we'll know whether we've ovulated or not. And at this point, too, the cervical fluid, it dries up pretty fast. So when progesterone takes over, it actually dries up your cervical fluid. That's one of the goals or the roles of progesterone. And it becomes almost like opaque, sticky, and it's white, and usually if you were to look at it under a microscope, you would see it looks like a basket weave almost. So it literally blocks the passage of sperm. So your body's like, all right, the gates are up. No more sperm. I'm not trying to get pregnant right now. And that's what would happen with that. And then for the emotional side of things, so it really varies. So right as you come off of ovulation, you're kind of riding high off of all the good vibes, the estrogen and the testosterone and all these things that have been happening. And that usually lasts for that first week of your luteal phase. And then in that second half, that second week, right before you get your period, you'll find that your mood starts to shift a little bit, and this again can be linked to having lower levels of progesterone, because if our progesterone is where it's supposed to be, we typically feel okay, but if it's lower, then it can bring on feelings of anxiety and all the PMS feelings that we have, the anger and sometimes rage and the short temper, and as I said, anxiety and even depression for a lot of women too. And just so everyone knows, your estrogen is tied very closely to serotonin. And so when our estrogen levels are low, if women have low levels of estrogen, they can be, one of the symptoms of that is depression. And so when our estrogen drops off so fast after we ovulate, it can actually bring on this mini depression almost. So that's why we crave so many carbohydrate heavy foods, because we want to boost up our serotonin. So sugar and carbs boost your serotonin faster than any other food. And so that's why those cravings come on, especially for things like chocolate as well. chocolate has all those feel-good things and ingredients in them, and it really helps to boost your brain function. But it's unfortunately a very short-lived experience, and then we end up feeling pretty shitty within an hour or two of having all these kinds of foods. But then we need to have more to feel better, and the cycle continues. So the idea here is to really, first of all, honor yourself and say, okay, well, clearing your calendar is a really good place to start. So that, the last 5 to 7 days before your cycle, if you can start to, take off the really big things, the big networking events or the big meetings or whatever it is, prospecting, all of that stuff. It's a lot more difficult to do that in this time of your cycle. And I find that if we more focus on nesting and maybe working on our home office, on organizing, on taking care of personal to-do lists, all of those kinds of things in this end part of our cycle are much more conducive, I think, to this time. So that's like really what one should be doing around this time. And in terms of food, actually focusing on healthy carbohydrates, so lots of sweet potatoes and sweet vegetables, and they're all very, root vegetables are very grounding energetically, and they can be really useful if you are feeling frazzled and all over the place and anxious and all these symptoms that show up in that PMS-y kind of time.
You never are more excited to clean your house than during luteal phase.
The takeaway.
I always notice myself, it's the time where I'm like skipping around doing laundry and cleaning up, and I check, and I'm always in luteal phase when I'm really tired and excited about it. So funny.
You're so funny. I love it. So true. I know. I mean, I find that I'm going to the post office. I'm organizing, cleaning the house. It's just, it's one of those things. It's a
luteal phase too. Isn't that kind of that would be when it's a good time to look at your finance? You're very organizational in mindset, right? You just kind of have more patience to sit down and organize things.
That's what progesterone does. It really, brings you down a notch. And and you want to be, doing things that are time consuming and take a lot of focus. I find it's really a great time to do all those things, all those personal things. Yeah.
Do you want to become a confident and masterful life coach? Imagine feeling completely supported by a brilliant sisterhood while you launch your dream business and attain financial freedom. Mentor Masterclass is an all-in life coach training program for 40 women who are on a mission to learn from the best. You can join Mentor Masterclass at the beginning of any new month while spaces are available. Head on over to mentormasterclass.com to learn more about the training and apply now.